What's up, you guys? Sean Ross Sapp here for the Fightful.com podcast, September 8th edition, with a very special guest who is going to be our new Thursday co-host. I'm going to say this. We aggressively pursued this guy. Aggressively. It is none other than former UFC fighter, current PWG Evolve. He's wrestling everywhere, you guys. You got to check him out. High praise this guy has gotten from everyone within the wrestling industry. Matt Riddle. Matt, how are you?
I'm fantastic, man. It's good to be a part of the show now.
Yeah, when we started Fightful.com, we wanted to really go after that crossover audience, and I don't know that there are many people that embody that more than you. Now, let's not be coy. You've had to have heard the praise that you've gotten for how quickly you have adapted to pro wrestling, Matt.
I have. I've heard people compare me to Kurt Angle, and they compare me to other greats that have picked it up quickly. And, yeah, I try not to let it get to my head. I try to just stay as hungry as the next guy. And I think the only thing that separates me from the pack is I just bring something that's extremely different than everybody else. And I think that's what makes me shine a little more than a lot of the other guys. Because if you look at what some of these other guys are doing, they're doing double front flips to the outside of the ring. They're doing crazy things. And I'm not doing anything crazy, but I'm still making that connection,
Do you think that more MMA fighters that would get into it would have that same success? You did it at a much earlier age than someone like Shayna Baszler, who I also thought has adapted very well, but she's a little older. Do you think more MMA fighters could do that? Because we don't really see that a lot.
I'll be honest, most MMA fighters, some of them have personalities. Like I've seen like Tom Lawler, and he likes professional wrestling as well. And I've seen a couple others, even like a Conor McGregor, But you probably realize this, most mixed martial artists or even pro boxers or Muay Thai fighters, it's not that they don't have a personality. It's just that their personality is pretty strong. They're usually more quiet, keep to themselves, and, they're intense people. So granted, I still have that kind of personality, but you still need that personality where you can still connect to the fans and have that emotional connection. And that's the biggest thing, being able to work with people and have that connection, being personable. And I think that would be the hard part for a lot of mixed martial artists, because the best part about fighting is you don't have to be personal. You don't have to be anything. You can be yourself and just win, just beat people up.
Now, you've had a unique – it's so interesting. The way you got into the UFC, the way you got into pro wrestling, it's all really interesting. Is it true that you only had one amateur fight before going to the UFC and the Ultimate Fighter?
Yeah, I had one amateur fight, fought at the Mohegan Sun in Connecticut. I don't remember the guy's name. I bet I could find it on SureDog, but, I went out there, creamed him, and then tried out for the Ultimate Fighter a couple of weeks later, and I did lie and say I was 1-0 professional, but at the time, MMA was so new, there was like no SureDog to really check everybody's record. There wasn't that many commissions, so they kind of took my word for it. And then, I got on, broke that dude's jaw damn similar, found out I wasn't really a pro fighter. It was too late, and I was in like
So that knockout is one of the most iconic knockouts in Ultimate Fighter history, and it was kind of a freaking terrifying knockout, honestly. How did you feel when that happened?
When it first happened, of course I was excited. I finished the fight by knockout. I'm more of a jiu-jitsu wrestler guy, so I was excited about that. But then, when he didn't wake up for 5 minutes, I started to get a little worried. And then when he woke up screaming, at least when he woke up, I knew he was alive. And then when he woke up screaming, I was kind of concerned, but they gave him morphine. He calmed down, and then he found out his jaw was broken in 3 spots and stuff like that.
There was some really underrated talent that year. Luke Zachrich was really good, underrated guy who got eliminated in the first round. Gerald Harris as well went on to have a good career. So you were in the UFC. You had your first pro fight in the UFC. You don't see that a lot anymore these days. I mean, we see it this Saturday with CM Punk. But so by all means, you were in the UFC after, what, 2 fights, period?
Yeah.
but including the Ultimate Fighter, or 2 or 3 fights rather.
Yeah, I mean, I had 2 fights on the Ultimate Fighter and 1 fight, amateur before that. So 3 fights before I fought on live television for the UFC in the Palms.
Was that intimidating for you, or were you just like, I'm ready to do this?
To me, when I wrestled in high school and college, I felt like I put a lot of pressure on myself for no reason. And then when I decided to do jiu-jitsu and MMA, I decided to put no pressure on myself. I go, the worst thing that happens is I lose or get knocked out or my arm broken, whatever. And just having that attitude, I never felt stressed or pressure again. Like, even when I wrestled, they'd be like, oh, you're wrestling this guy in front of these people. Triple H is here. William Regal's here. Blah, 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 blah. You got to be on your best behavior, this and that. Don't get me wrong. I'm on my best behavior. I do my job great, but I don't stress it. I don't worry about it because I'm like, the worst thing that happens is like I trip on my way out to the ring, or I get knocked out in 10 seconds, or I botch a spot, like there's only so many things that can happen that are that terrible. And you can always cover it up, and they understand because they've been in the same situation before and they've made mistakes.
So you started off 5-1 in the UFC. That would, like I said, somebody who didn't have really much of an MMA career before that, that's really unheard of. There's a picture that has circulated of you, which I'm sure you've seen from years before UFC, and it shows you standing atop a podium, and Jon Jones is sitting right next to you. So, I mean, yep. Did you all encounter each other, obviously, before UFC?
Yeah, actually, we both wrestled in New York. We both wrestled in the state of New York. And earlier that year, we wrestled in a tournament called Windsor. It was the Christmas tournament that I won, and he actually took third in as well. And then we ran into each other at states where he ended up taking third, and I ended up winning again. And yeah, it's funny. We always got along great. We never liked the guy who took second, John Jack Sullivan. We were never a big fan of that guy. But we always got along great. We would drill with each other, talk to each other, all that stuff. And then I was already in the UFC, fighting, training, doing my thing. And all of a sudden, I see this dude wearing a Union Endicott, warm-up jacket. And I was like, that's from New York, I remember seeing that jacket in high school. And then when he turned around, I'm like, is that Jon Jones? And then, of course, it was his fight against Stephan Bonner. I believe that was his first big televised fight. And he lit the world on fire that night. He hit him spinning back, and
German suplexes.
Crazy suplex. He really put his name on the map, showcasing his skills and having an exciting style in fighting. So,
any indication back then that he was much of a partier?
Not for me. I'll be honest. I didn't hang out with Jon Jones like that. We didn't really party that much. I didn't hang out with him outside of competition too much. But to be honest, no, I never saw any side of that because I know it's his family's pretty religious. All of his brothers are professional athletes, So, me, I didn't think anything of it. I had no idea.
So you had a really successful UFC career. And one of my favorite moments in it, I've mentioned it on Twitter. I think your post UFC 149 press conference thing was the best thing about the goddamn show, to be honest with you, because that show isn't fondly looked back on, to say the least, but that promo is. And within a few months, you were fighting in England.
Yeah, well, that was the point. At the time, I wanted to get some English fighters because at the time they had guys like John McGuire, Dan Hardy, Che Mills, John Hathaway, people you don't hear about in today's mixed martial arts world, but at the time were ranked in the top 10 in the welterweight division. So
yeah, and you never did get that fight with Hardy, but I see you going back and forth with him on Twitter, and I have to ask you, were you working Dan Hardy?
Of course, I'm working Dan Hardy. Same thing with the Conor McGregor. Conor McGregor said something about pro wrestling, working all the wrestlers, and then I was talking to Blue Meanie Brian, and he was like, "Hey, you should get on that too," So I was like, "All right." So I wrote something calling him and Dan Hardy a mutt, and then of course, a bunch of haters, keyboard warriors came at me, MMA junkie, threw it up in an interview. The thing is, some people get all bent out of shape about it, and they're supposed to. That's why we do stuff like that. But for us, as long as people are talking and there's discussion and the topic of that discussion, we're doing our jobs,
Sure. And Dan, he fell for it hook, line, and sinker.
Of course
Man,
he
that
did.
dude bought it.
Of course he did. Probably until his girlfriend or his wife told him to knock it off and get off his phone. So, and to me, I'm actually wrestling in England the 18th or 19th of December, and I was telling Dan, I was like, I'll be in England, bro. Come find me. I'll be in your country. So but if he showed up, you know what? I'd probably smile, laugh, nothing would happen, or maybe he would attack me. I don't know. Pretty responsible.
So that was a great exchange I saw. Like, he was criticizing you for being a pro wrestler now, and he had said that you were a loser. And in my mind, I was like, he probably doesn't know your career path right now. Like, he probably doesn't realize you're one of the most sought out independent wrestlers in the world at this point.
He probably doesn't realize that he's kind of a one-trick pony, and I can, I'm not going to toot my horn, but, there's things that I want, and if I want it really bad, I get it. And I've always wanted to be a pro wrestler, and I always wanted to be in the UFC. I always wanted to be in high times. There's certain things I've always wanted to be and get to or reach a goal, and so far I'm doing well.
Do you think that if your UFC release would have happened in 2016 instead of 2013 or 14, I believe it's 2013, it would have been received different? Because just in the past 3 years, marijuana has been embraced more and more with each passing day.
Honestly, I don't think it would have made a difference time period. I don't think nothing's really changed since 2012 and 2016 other than they banned TRT and most pharmaceutical drugs from in competition, and they up the levels of metabolites that can be in your system for in competition. That's the only thing that's really changed. So to be honest, I wouldn't have failed a drug test in 2016 because I failed for 15 nanograms and today it's 150. On top of that, I think the only difference now is I would have been fighting from 2012 to 2016 and I'd have a lot more wins and a lot more credentials, So by now, I think they wouldn't fire me. When they fired me, granted, I was on a 4-fight win streak, but I wasn't a Jon Jones, I wasn't a Dan Hardy. I wasn't necessarily packing an arena full because I literally started on TV, then had to fight my way back to TV. I was finally getting fight of the night, submission of the nights. I was fighting on TV consistently, and then they fired me. So 4 more years of where I was at when I got fired, yeah, they wouldn't have been able to do what they did to me. But when they did it, it was the best chance they had of firing me and burying me and getting rid of me completely. Because if they wouldn't have fired me, I probably would be the welterweight champion of the world. And
yeah, you were on a hot streak.
That either, if you actually look at the welterweight division, look how big the guys are, look how big I am, and look at just how I got so good in pro wrestling as quick as I did, and look at how good I got at mixed martial arts as quick as I did. I would right now probably be the welterweight champion of the world.
That's another thing I wanted to ask. I mean, what is your weight at right now?
Right now, I hang out. I'm just a healthy 210.
Man, and that's
just a healthy.
And it's crazy to think. And you're in great shape. Dave Meltzer was actually touting how ridiculous of conditioning that you have at 210. You made 170, and you made it. I don't think you missed weight once, did you?
I never miss weight. I pride myself on a couple things. When it comes to my job, I'm a professional. I always showed up. I always made weight. I did everything. And the only time I ever failed a test or anything was when I took a fight on a week's notice or the last one, which, to be honest, I don't really think I failed. I think that was kind of some rid of me because they didn't want to deal with me.
So you left, you went to Titan FC. I remember that fight. I actually interviewed you for that fight, and I brought up pro wrestling. And this was before there was any talk, any mention, anything of that nature. I was just like, there was a lot of crossover at that point. You had the Bellator, TNA, Spike TV thing, a lot of people jumping back and forth. Brock Lesnar was doing his thing. And I kind of mentioned it to you just to get a quote, just to feel it out. And you went back and you sounded all too excited about pro wrestling. And that kind of surprised me. I don't know why it surprised me, but it did. So you've had this in your mind for a long time.
I had it in my mind before I even signed with Titan or decided to fight for Titan. Honestly, the big thing I wanted to do, like, I wanted to win a title belt, like in MMA. I wanted to either win the Titan belt or the Bellator belt or whatever. And then I wanted to take that right over to pro wrestling because then I can at least bring a belt from MMA over as well with my credentials. You know, unfortunately, I wasn't able to get that. Plus, honestly, I was just so tired of Brew. And I just need to give pro wrestling a try. I just needed to, and I'm glad I did.
You had your fair share of injuries in MMA, but from what I understand, you haven't had to pull out of any, if many, pro wrestling bookings. What do you attribute that to?
Not cutting weight. You know, when I went to the Ultimate Fighter, I was 185. I fought 185, and I wanted to stay at 185. The UFC really didn't give me an option, and I started to cut weight. And literally the first fight I was supposed to cut weight, I was supposed to fight Ryan Thomas, and I ended up tearing my meniscus training for that fight, probably because I was too dehydrated, rolling hard, and I tore my meniscus, you know? And then, you know, over the years, I, you know, broke a hand or tore a ligament, usually in the fights. But what would happen is I would, like, slightly tear something in the fight, not feel it, go back to train for another fight, tear it, and then no insurance would cover it, and then I'd be out for a little bit because I'd have to make money and pay for my injuries.
So I know that throughout that period, you were in and out of a couple of organizations. Bellator was one of them, but you didn't actually get to fight for them. Was there a reason that you and Bellator couldn't make that happen? I know there was an injury, but I also know there was some other stuff involved, but I just couldn't get it out of you at the time.
Yes, that other stuff is something I still legally can't talk about, or I would love to. And, of course, another time, possibly, but at this moment, I still can't talk about that. The big thing is I can talk about is the Bellator released me free of charge. I just wasn't allowed to say anything about my release or the conditions of my release or anything like that. You know,
so they had you under a non-disclosure pretty much.
But I'm pretty sure, like, if you ask Sam Kaplan or whatever, you could probably get his 2 cents on the situation, and I can tell you if he's telling the truth or not.
Interesting. So I got to ask you, will you ever fight again?
You know, I've actually been offered a couple fights recently, this, that, and the other thing, and they're tempting. You know, like, it's tempting when somebody, like, waves, like, $10,000 in front of your face for one night's work. But then I think about all the days I had to train up into a fight, and then I'll have to cancel all my wrestling bookings because if I get hurt wrestling before a fight, that's really not fair to the MMA promotion, you know? So I'd probably do that. Plus, I want to focus on a fight. So to be completely honest, probably not. Like, it's really even when I was in the UFC, I was winning fights, doing great. I was training hard, doing my thing. But I'll be honest, the only reason I did it was because, one, I love fighting, and two, it was a really easy job. Like, I only worked 3 times a year, and I got paid to fight, and I got paid really good money. The things I hated about fighting, it sounds weird, is I hated beating people. I hated beating somebody and then watching them get paid half as much as me at least. You know, they're going to get paid less money now. You know, maybe they have something going on at home and that's going to fuck everything up. And then, you know, on top of it, they might lose their job because maybe I dominated them or maybe I took them down. Well, however, you know how the UFC is. If you get dominated, they just fire you. So it's
You're not the only person to mention that. George St. Pierre actually recently said much of the same thing.
And honestly, I felt bad. It's like, and then like you hear people talk crap about people and this and the other thing. One of the things I love most about professional wrestling is like you don't have to worry about that. Like if it doesn't matter if I win or lose a wrestling match. Of how we both wrestled and how we put it together and how good it looks and how we react and make the crowd react to us.
There's a lot more of that. Like even as I mentioned, you had to pull out of some fights with injuries. There might be times you go into a wrestling match with an injury, but the difference is you're working with somebody. You can work around that. They can help you. If Clements and he knows that you tweaked your knee last week, he's not going to work with you. He's going to go after that. So, I mean, that is something that a lot of people don't often consider. I mean, and that's something. Do you still train MMA?
I do. I actually rarely do professional wrestling training, and most of the time I do jiu-jitsu a couple times a week, and I spar a couple times a week, and I, of course I lift and do that stuff. But I might train professional wrestling like at a gym, at a wrestling school, maybe once or twice every couple of weeks, just because I'm so busy traveling, wrestling every weekend, and then teaching jiu-jitsu and MMA. And then I got the 3 kids and, so on and so forth.
I know that you spent some time at the Monster Factory. What was that like?
It was good. And now don't get me wrong, when I first started doing professional wrestling, all I did was pro wrestling. I was at the Monster Factory 4 days, 5 days a week, every day from like 7 o'clock at night till 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock at night, I was there every day. But the Monster Factory was great. It was good. They got great trainers, and it's a really good place to, just, get the basics down, just like focus too much on big things. And I feel like their school really focuses on getting you to where you want to be, Like my goal was to possibly wrestle in the WWE, if not wrestle in Japan and everywhere else, So I'm doing that. Some people's goal is just to go to Ring of Honor. Some people's goal is just to go to CZW, So it all depends on what your goal is, And I think they help you really get out there.
I know Danny Cage runs a really tight ship over there too. Like, I've seen, I've subscribed to that Monster Factory network he has, and I see the training, and it can be pretty brutal. But they also book wrestlers too, and they give you an opportunity to perform.
Yeah.
So what's that? I know are you still the Monster Factory heavyweight champion?
Oh no, I didn't lose it. They stripped me of the belt, so you know how that goes.
Yeah, I get stripped of titles all the time, Matt.
It happens to everybody. I'm just throwing my phone on the charger if you're wondering why I'm moving all
that's fine.
Crazy.
That's fine. So I had heard from multiple people earlier this year that that WWE was interested in you. Also, I heard that you blew the tryout out of the water, that you impressed a lot of people. What was that tryout process like, and did you get any feedback from the company?
Yeah, the tryout was good, Got really good feedback from the company. It's actually how I ended up working with Evolve. Had the tryout over the summer, went extremely well. They did a background check. Everything came back good except for the whole Mary Jane situation from, but everybody knew that. You didn't have to do a background check on me to know that I failed a couple of drug tests. So, they brought that up, and they're like, if anything, that would be an issue, blah, blah, blah. Okay. A couple months go by, they're like, hey, everything's great. You're good to go. Look, it looks good, and I'm like, sweet. Be expecting to do medicals and this, that, and the other thing. So I was just waiting and waiting. I'm just training, doing Monster Factory shows. And then I was like, you know what? I'm going to, hit up Ring of Honor because I've trained there from time to time with a couple of my buddies, Damian Punisher Martinez, who wrestles for Ring of Honor now, and
Great
QT
talent.
Marshall. So I was working, I would go over there, work with them, and I talked to Hunter and a couple other people, and nothing was set in stone. But, we were talking about possibly me working at Ring of Honor, And, Damian, my buddy Martinez was like, hey, you should probably, and QT were like, hey, you should probably ask the WWE if this is okay because you don't want to jeopardize your shot with them. And then, of course, I agreed. So I called up Canyon or emailed Canyon, and I was like, hey, what do you think about me working for Ring of Honor? I wouldn't sign anything because I know we're still talking. And, what do you think? And he suggested, hey, it wouldn't be a deal breaker, but have you thought about working for Evolve? And he introduced me to Gabe. Me and Gabe started talking, and that was like last October, and I debuted, I think, late October or early November last year. And it's been a wrap. I've been working with Evolve, and I've been talking to the E back and forth. And granted, like I saw William Regal this weekend at PWG. I see him all the time. But at the time, like Canyon told me they're going to take a pass on me. After they told me yes and everything, pass on me for now due to my past.
Just the marijuana tests?
Well, you got to realize this is also what they're telling me. Maybe they don't like my face. Maybe they don't like the way I wrestle. Maybe I'm not built good enough.
Well, there was a lot that was made of some comments that you made in jest in an interview, and Dana White brought those up. And, I mean, if you ever heard that interview in jest, it was not a serious comment. And it's like if you look at a transcript of anything, it could be misconstrued. But was that one of the things, or was it just the test, you think?
I think it was. I don't even think it was the test per se. I think it was my stance on the situation.
Sure.
Me being like, I don't think. Basically, me being like, I think medical marijuana is a good thing. I think people should be prescribed medical marijuana. I think pharmaceutical drugs are bad, and steroids are bad, and alcohol is bad, and all these things poison you and kill you. And the one plant that doesn't is banned, and they won't let you use it medically or recreationally. And
I think it would be a great benefit, especially under their wellness policy, where these guys aren't able to medicate themselves with painkillers, as they probably shouldn't be able to. But marijuana, rather safe, especially in comparison. You're not going to see. Can't remember any marijuana-related deaths in pro wrestling. So I think. Do you think they'll ever soften their stance?
Of course, just like you said, it takes time and it's unfortunate. But like just like when I was in the UFC, when I was fighting in the UFC, when I got fired, TRT was legal. You were allowed to take Oxycontin and like Vicodin and hydrocodone before fights if you had a doctor's note. Adderall, whatever. If you were prescribed it, you could take it. And marijuana, they tested for 15 metabolites, whatever. Now they test for 150. TRT's banned. All those pharmaceutical drugs are banned in competition. Out of competition, of course, you can use medication, but not in competition anymore. And the rules have changed drastically just in the 4 years I've been gone. And literally, they changed most of those rules about 4 months after they fired me, because I talked to Mark Ratner, the guy who's in charge of most of the commissions. And I wouldn't say in charge, but he basically leads the world in athletic commissions,
Sure.
And he talked to me and he goes, Matt, I agree 110% with you. TRT should be banned, should be allowed, and marijuana, they shouldn't be testing for such a low number. He said that to me. 1 week later, Michael Mersch, the lawyer of the UFC, called me and fired me.
Wow.
And that was that.
So that had to be a surprise to you when that happened.
The thing is, even though I always have a smile on my face and I seem like a super nice and chill guy, which I am, I try to think very negative about most things all the time. I always think worst case scenario, just like when I talked about fighting. Worst thing that happens is I get knocked out or I get my arm broken or something like that. Just like every time I fought, I would tell my wife, like even when I won, that I'm like, they're going to fire me. And she's like, no, they won't. And she would always laugh. She would say, oh, they like you so much, this, that, and the other thing. And granted, they did. Like we always chatted. We were always friendly. It's like I don't think I've ever had a bad conversation with a UFC employee. And, I was on a 4-fight win streak, and what happened.
You mentioned your wife. I know that she was doing some pro wrestling training for a while. Did she stop that?
Yeah, she was doing the pro wrestling training for a while, but pro wrestling is one of those things, kind of like mixed martial arts. Like if it's not like in your heart, it's way too hard just to do. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's not like a pickup game of basketball or something. Like to train mixed martial arts or train professional wrestling to get paid for it, to become a professional at it, is extremely hard to do.
Well, if the bumps don't get you, the travel will. And if the travel doesn't get you, then the general schedule will.
And, and I love my wife, but she's also the kind of lady that, it's kind of hard to teach her sometimes, in the sense, like, you've probably dealt with it in a way like you're telling your girlfriend or a woman or something like that, and you're like, hey, maybe you want to do it like this, and they go, I know.
Yes, but
And
they don't know.
If you knew, I wouldn't have to tell you.
Yeah. Oh, I used to teach my wife kickboxing, and she looked good on the pads, but then when we would go live, I'd be like, hey, you need to kind of change this up a little bit. Your footwork's a little off. I know. Well, you don't. So yeah, sure. But yeah, if I remember the first time I followed like a Facebook page that you all had of your fitness things, and I was like, geez, this family, like you got to be incredibly disciplined.
Yeah, well, she works out like crazy. Like she actually teaches CrossFit at a gym. She teaches gymnastics because she was a 2-time All-American at LSU at gymnastics, and she works out all the time. Like she's gone now teaching gymnastics and teaching CrossFit. You know,
I think gymnastics is an awesome base for both MMA and pro wrestling. Like
it really is. It really is, and that's why she decided to like try out pro wrestling. Well, there's a couple of variables with pro wrestling, and especially female pro wrestling. When you're, as a guy, you can be like 30 years old and get into the WWE, possibly get into pro wrestling. When you're a woman and you're 30 years old, it's unfortunate, but like one of the things they say at the WWE is, hey, if you want to work as a diva or female superstar there, the first question they ask you usually is, do you think you could post for Playboy tomorrow? And if you can answer yes, then you could probably work for the WWE. If you don't answer yes like that, you probably can't, And I love my wife. She's great looking, but she's 31 years old. And, like I would look at her in Playboy.
Well, Playboy doesn't do nude shoots anymore.
Well, I guess it'd be a different magazine.
Yeah, they got rid of it. Don't know why, but they did. So this Evolve relationship has been a very successful one. I mean, the buzz off of Evolve and off of your work in Evolve has just been unavoidable, at least in the circles that I run. What has that experience been like for you?
Honestly, I can't be happier with the decision I made to work with Gabe and work with Evolve. It's one thing to work with and wrestle great wrestlers, but Gabe really had an eye for it, and he put me on a great path. Like you said, you've heard nothing but great things and heard about like my transition just getting better and better and better and better. And I would say that had something to do with Gabe. Of course, I'm putting the work in as well, working hard as well. But he kind of helped guide it. Like when I first started, the matches were short, very short. I started to get a little longer. And then I started telling a little more of a story. And now I'm more part of the roster, part of one of the boys, part of the thing. When I first started, I was kind of more of like a test. Like, are we going to keep him for like a month? Are we going to keep him for a week? Like, how long are we going to use him, And I was a test. I think he used me as a test. That's why I got such short times at the beginning. But I passed the test with flying colors, and I think he booked me against Ricochet against Anthony Nese this Saturday.
Yeah, I saw that.
So I saw that too, and I was like, "Well, I didn't know that was happening until today." So that's pretty crazy. So I'm stoked about that.
I scheduled like I was, we're gonna post obviously the information about the cards, and we were gonna post it Friday, and the card now is outdated. I got to go in and change it, and I was like, "Ooh, I wonder what he thinks about that." So Ricochet is added to this match with Tony Nese. What are your thoughts on that? That's kind of like something big to have dropped on you because one of the top talents in the world is Ricochet.
Yeah, honestly, I'm stoked. We hung out this past weekend at PWG, and I was like, I'm a big fan of your work, because his style is so different than mine, and he's the same way back to me. He goes, man, like, watching me wrestle and like watching him wrestle and then watching myself wrestle. I don't know how he could like watching me wrestle when I watch him wrestle because of the stuff he does. But honestly, in my head, I personally love these kind of matches, the way they style up for me, because I got 2 high flyers in the ring that are going to do all their high flying stuff. And then all I had to do is kind of like run in there, hit a stiff strike, a hard strike, a big suplex, just a nasty move on somebody, and I'll get just the same reaction without like having to fly over a top rope.
How much offense have you actually picked up from pro wrestling training? Because I think a lot of people, especially like from catch-can wrestling, a lot of that stuff, that's how I personally learned in the few matches that I've done. That's where almost all my offense came from. Did you retain a lot of that from MMA and just have to refine it, or were you basically taught a lot of this offense?
When I first started doing pro wrestling, I wanted to do all MMA striking, but talking to trainers and stuff, they're like, hey, MMA is a little too quick, a little too hidden, because, you know, you're kind of hiding your strikes. While pro wrestling, even if somebody hard or fast, you got to let the whole crowd see it. Let them register. So for me, that was a big thing. So I learned all the pro wrestling strikes, the European uppercuts, the forearms, the chops, all that stuff. But at the same time, though, my mind to translate my like Muay Thai striking, my boxing, my MMA style striking, my knees into a pro wrestling style. So basically all I did was maybe add a jump before, maybe a little pump fake, maybe a little this or that, just so the crowd can see it and feel it more, rather than it just being a quick strike and nobody knows what happened.
I remember when I interviewed you in February of 2014 before that Titan fight, and we talked pro wrestling. At the time, you told me if you came into pro wrestling, you didn't necessarily want to do the MMA gimmick. At what point did that change?
You know, when I first started doing pro wrestling and I was training, and I can do all the moves for the most part. I can do the springboards to the outside. I can do the backflips. I can do the shooting stars. I can do the swantons and the 1.5s and the 630s. I can do all the flips and the crazy stuff. But, you know, Danny Cage, one of the guys at the Monster Factory, who goes, hey, it's awesome that you can do all that stuff. But it's like, but the thing is, there's somebody out there that can do a 630 better than you, you know, a double front flip better. There's somebody else that can do a shooting star better than you. There's somebody else that can do a Hurricane Rana better than you. And the reason being is because these people have been doing Hurricane Ranas and all these moves for years, and all they wanted to do were these moves for years. So that's why I put it in my head, well, if I want to catch up to these guys, which I did, and because of my background, you know, I was like, I should probably use the mixed martial arts. And especially when I first got into pro wrestling, seeing like Brock Lesnar and seeing even guys like Kyle O'Reilly, who I just wrestled, mixed martial arts, and people are loving it. And I was, you know, watching that, I was like, I'm pretty sure I can do it. He's doing and make it even more believable and even more better, you know, even better. And I think that's what I did, and that's what I'm doing. And I think every time I go out there, I'm getting better and better at the pro wrestling aspect of it and translating my mixed martial arts into it.
How in the shit do you wrestle without shoes? Barefoot.
It's
indie shows.
It's easy.
Indie shows. It's either really hot or really cold at those venues generally. You don't get any pain, anything?
No, I stretch out the ankles and the feet. I usually wear flip-flops the whole time, and then usually like 5-10 minutes before a match, I'm like hopping up and down, like shuffling, warming up. So then like I'm good to go. And I think a lot of people forget like I've been doing MMA and jiu-jitsu for almost like 10 years, and I just wrestled barefoot. You know, I was doing jiu-jitsu barefoot, kickboxing barefoot, everything just barefoot. So.
But yeah, I noticed that. And
Yeah.
Is there ever any do you ever see yourself maybe moving to boots, shoes, anything of that nature?
I do. I feel like if, say, I worked for maybe a bigger company and they asked me to wear shoes, I possibly might. Or depending on the style of matches I might be working, I might depend on, I might wear shoes. Like if I'm wrestling hardcore matches, which I rarely do, but if I were to wrestle like a hardcore match where we're going out in the outside the whole match and doing that, then I'll probably wear street clothes. I probably won't even wear shorts. I'll probably just wear jeans, a t-shirt, and my shoes. You know? But like if I'm in a wrestling match, I'm probably just gonna wrestle barefoot because I feel most comfortable with it. And I feel like it adds that element of rawness to it. Like when I kick somebody in the face with my a little different than when somebody kicks them in the head with a kick pad, you know? It's
Yeah,
bone
absolutely.
It's bone to flesh rather than like a pad to a head.
Now, you got to wrestle for PWG last weekend, Battle of Los Angeles, like any other. It's really a special type of thing. Are you going to work with PWG more in the future? And how was Battle of Los Angeles for you?
They said, please come back. They were chanting it after my match, so I'm really hoping I get another chance out there. I had a great time in the 5-on-5 match with Jushin Liger and Sami Callihan, Tommaso, and Brian Kendrick. Like, it was the experience alone at PWG was amazing. The fans were amazing. It's all said and done. The Bola tournament, but it's like an experience. It's something I'll never forget.
Now, we have quite a big fight coming up on Saturday. Of course, you have, Absolute Intense Wrestling Friday. You've got 2 Evolve shows this weekend. And we also have this UFC 203 show. CM Punk has taken what I would like to call the reverse Matt Riddle path. He had a full pro wrestling career and is now debuting in MMA with the UFC. What do you think of somebody doing that? Now, you didn't have a lot of fights before you got into the UFC, but you also had an amateur wrestling background. What were your feelings when he decided to make that move?
I respect him for the move. It's something you could tell he's wanted to do for a long time. I respect that move. I don't think it was the smartest move. Professional wrestling takes its toll on anybody's body. And the thing is, it'd be one thing if you wrestled kind of like me. Like me, I do more of an MMA style wrestling, and I keep it in the ring. Watch CM Punk's highlight videos from his indie work to his WWE work. The dude's going through a lot of tables, taking a lot of punishment damage on the outside of the ring on metal, and put his time in. He put some real serious work in, To me, I think it would be easier to go from MMA to pro wrestling just because MMA is just so grinding and mean and so hard on your body in that sense. And then pro wrestling's hard on your body, but at least you can work around injuries and stay healthy. So to do it backwards is really hard. And I know Brock did it backwards too, but Brock was also an All-American and an NCAA champion, and he's a heavyweight fighter. And heavyweight MMA, nothing against it. But if you're Lesnar and you fight heavyweight, you're probably going to win 9 out of your 10 fights.
Sure.
Because of your athleticism.
Yeah, the athleticism is a weird, different level. And as we say, I talked to Showdown Joe on our Wednesday show. It's also a coin flip a lot of times with heavyweights because of the size of the gloves, the size of the fighters, things of that nature. How much UFC, MMA do you follow these days, or do you?
I rarely follow the UFC like this. I mean, I'm following this weekend's fight because I'm going to be in Cleveland, Ohio Friday. And, that's probably the reason I'm being brought into Cleveland, Ohio is because the fights are Saturday. They might as well have a former UFC fighter, pro wrestlers, because Shayna Baszler's going to be there as well. And Dan Severn. A whole bunch.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, a whole bunch of MMA people at a show. Should be fun at AIW.
And how much do you follow WWE, TNA, anything of that nature?
When I was getting into pro wrestling, I was, and when I was in the UFC, I was following WWE because I watched it. But training, it kind of opened up my eyes to that, that underground world of pro wrestling, that indie world, that PWG. Like, I had no idea that stuff existed up until about 2 years ago. And when I saw it, I knew I needed to be a part of it. It was the second I saw it, I was like, I need to get there. I know if I get there, I'll be happy. It's like I need to get there, and I don't know how I did it, but I got there. But,
Speaking of getting,
I watch it from time to time. So,
speaking of getting there, TJ Perkins, the guy who you're slated to face on Sunday, it looks like he's there. He's a part of the Cruiserweight Classic. He's been promoted as a part of this Cruiserweight division on Raw. Like, I mean, you're working guys, Ricochet, who is in Lucha Underground, New Japan. Tony Nese, I think he was in the Cruiserweight Classic. You're working these guys who have this type of experience. What is that like? And what does that say for you to be, or say to you that you are doing that like under a year and a half in?
It's good, but I have to compliment Gabe. He kind of put me in a situation and gave me a chance to shine. And I know, like, these guys love working with me. I love working with them because, like you said, their experience is through the roof. I am the greenest guy in the locker room at Evolve. I'm the greenest guy at PWG. But they all respect me. They all know what I've done, and they all see. They've all seen me grow in front of them. It's only been a short amount of time since they've seen the first match of mine, and then they wrestle me, co-main events, and we're getting the crowd going bananas, So to me, it's awesome that I was given the opportunity. I get to work with such great people because they're bringing me up to their speed that much quicker, and it helps me out. For them, I think it helps them out in a way, though, too, just because of picking it up, what a rookie I am, and the buzz around my name. I think that also helps anybody that wrestles me as well.
One of my bosses, James Vanderland, and his buddy Crazy Kelvin says that Billy Idol talked about in an interview that British people will spit on you if they like you.
I think that's more of like a punk metal thing.
Yeah.
Not a sporting event thing.
Man, little did you know that you were adored.
I'm pretty sure. We're allowed to swear on this podcast, right?
Oh, of course. Yeah, it's the internet.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the guy that called me a cocksucker and spit in my face, I'm positive. He looked so angry when he spit in my face.
Listen, maybe we need to track down the source because maybe that was a term of endearment too. But what if like at PWG or these indie shows, they didn't hit you with streamers? They just all spit on you while you're in the ring posing.
What's that?
What if you were at an indie show and instead of the streamers, they hit you with just a big bunch of spit from the audience?
I would probably just walk out. I'd probably walk out of the ring and I'd be done.
Oh man!
I'd demand my pay and I'd walk out.
So you have a big weekend. I mean, a big weekend. You're booked Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Where are the Evolve shows at?
Tomorrow's Cleveland, Ohio. Evolve is Deer Park, New York. At the first night at I forget, it's at a wrestling school, wrestling gym. It's like NYWC.
The Sportatorium.
Yeah, that one. And then the next night it's in Queens, New York at La Boom, I believe.
Nice. So you have a full plate, needless to say. That's why I try my best to schedule these shows on Thursdays because I know you're traveling on Fridays and things of that nature. What has the travel been like for you thus far with pro wrestling?
It's been good, most of the time they pay for my travel, they pay for my flights, or I'll road trip with other people. There's been times where I've had car trouble, like I've been in 2 accidents since I've been wrestling indies, but one was like a freak snowstorm, and the other one somebody it wasn't really my fault, either time. But other than that, like the travel's pretty good. I have been hit up with some date or some venues that are like the drive. I agree to it, and the drive was a lot more than I bargained for. And I'm not happy, when it's like Saturday or Sunday, and I've already wrestled once or twice, and I got to drive like another 14 hours, But at the same time, you get to work in the best thing about pro wrestling is I get to work in front of a different crowd, usually 3 times a week, every week. And I think that's what's helping me to build my name up as quick as I am. I get to perform in front of a live crowd, a different one usually every month, a couple of them. So my name's just going to keep going out there more and more and more.
Now, before we go, we'll talk about you in Japan, but I want to remind people, go to Fightful.com, the best in MMA, pro wrestling, and boxing. We've got several new hires. Matt is one of them. like I said, we aggressively pursued Matt. We thought he was a perfect fit to complement the likes of Vince Russo, Showdown Joe, great personalities in the world of MMA and pro wrestling. Go there and register. You get exclusive access to a lot of podcasts, to backstage news. We got a lot of exclusives from CM Punk this week leading up to his fight. Daniel Cormier, the exclusive interview with Chael Sonnen, lots of cool stuff there. I was told, Matt, that you have a new goal, that maybe Japan is in your future if things go well.
Yeah, well, this year I made some goals for my year of 2016, and my goals of 2016 were to wrestle internationally, which I will. I've already wrestled in Canada, and I'll be wrestling in Canada again at the end of this month, and I'm going over to England in December. But, and another goal of 2016 was to wrestle for PWG. I've obtained a lot of my goals of 2016. The two goals for 2017 right now, I want to wrestle in Japan, either Dragon Gate, New Japan, just somewhere in Japan. I want to touch their soil in a wrestling ring on their soil. I'll be happy once I do that. And then I want to win the Evolve title. If I don't get it by the end of this year, I want to win that belt by next year, because I know if I win that belt, I'll get a job somewhere, making a lot of money. So
sure,
that's how I look at it.
Of course.
Or they'll pay me more at Evolve. Either or.
And I can think of far worse places to be in pro wrestling than Evolve at this point.
That's the one thing. I really like my situation. Like, a lot of people ask me, do you want to go to WWE? Do you want to go to TNA or Lucha Underground? And it's not that I don't want to go to any of them. I would love to go to every single one of them. And I would like to wrestle for Evolve and pushing under the sun. If that was up to me, I don't want to just be at one place. I want to be everywhere. And that's
have any of those promotions contacted you? A TNA, a Lucha Underground, a New Japan?
The New Japan. Somebody contacted me from New Japan when I first started training professional wrestling, before I even had a full week under my belt. But it was, public knowledge that I was an MMA fighter from the UFC, now training professional wrestling. Somebody hit me up and they asked me to do an event, and they wanted me to tag with Phil Baroni. This was a while ago, and I declined. I said, honestly, guys, I don't want to embarrass you or myself. I don't think I'm up to par to wrestle on that stage yet. I never heard anything back. I saw Phil Baroni went over there. He tagged with somebody, and I heard the match was no comment. The match was whatever. But
some people get it from MMA, and some people don't.
What's that?
Some of the guys that make that transition, they get it, and other ones don't. And a lot of people, they think, I remember a lot of people thought that Rampage Jackson would be a natural, and he just wasn't. He wasn't a natural. And, I didn't hear a lot of people saying Matt Riddle's going to light the world on fire in pro wrestling, but then you did. So you just never know.
I think the big thing is, guys because Rampage got into it, King Mo got into it. But I think there's a problem right there. I think wrestling, I'm not saying if you are, you can't. But I think if you're kind of a tough bully type, and I don't mean that in a mean way to Rampage or King Mo, but I think if you're more of a tougher and you were always more of the bully, it's kind of hard to be a pro wrestler, because as a pro wrestler, you got to put yourself in a vulnerable spot. You got to be the underdog fighting back. Even if you're the bad guy, sometimes you got to be please don't hit me as a bad guy. And you still got to be underneath somebody, not down and out, but still in the fight, but underneath. And I think that's something people like Rampage, just don't get, because they've never been in that situation growing up. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Does that make sense? He's kind of like a Daniel Bryan.
Definitely.
You can tell Daniel Bryan's probably been picked on the playground.
Oh, sure.
That's why he's got that heart come from behind, and you can see it in his eyes. He's been there before, and he's not going to let you do it again. And I'll tell you that. I have that too, and I don't think everybody has that.
Before we go, are there any guys that you would point to, or girls, in pro wrestling or MMA that you think would fit? Maybe not at the top levels of either, but would make that crossover maybe a little more seamlessly than others?
For pro wrestlers crossing over to MMA, really impossible to tell. Because some people pro wrestle like animals and then fight like babies. So it's really hard to see what kind of animal you'll really get out of it. Fighters transferring.
Not to get you any heat with Triple H, but man, I saw that guy hit pads, and it was bad.
Yeah, he shouldn't fight. He shouldn't fight.
Definitely.
He should probably just give me a job and not fight me. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, and that's the thing. Like, it looks like he could kill you, but his hand speed probably isn't up to par, and his head movement's not there, and he's been hit a bunch of times with a steel chair, so his chin's probably gone too.
It's a big ass head too.
But MMA crossing over, I think the big thing you got to look for there is, they already have the athletic ability to do stuff, but you got to see if they have charisma. And like I said, most fighters don't have charisma, but when you see fighters that do, like a Conor McGregor or even a Jon Jones, those guys have the charisma, but I don't think they have the body type per se.
Yeah.
Too gangly, Conor just way too small.
Yeah. I think that a Jon Jones gimmick in pro wrestling, an undercover dickhead, would just be fantastic. Like one of those.
Oh,
Guys, Matt will be joining us each Thursday, basically at his convenience on the time because, as I mentioned, he travels, trains quite a bit. We'll be talking pro wrestling, MMA, his career, other people's careers. If he's not caught up on something, you'll get to watch me explain that to him. That should be plenty entertaining. But, Matt, anything you want to let the people know before we go?
No, man. Just, check it out. I'm wrestling AIW tomorrow in Cleveland, Ohio, and Evolve over the weekend. So check it out on wwnlive.com or.
Matt, absolutely thrilled to have you on board at Fightful.com. This was a hire that we definitely wanted. And if our audience has any indication, they seem to really enjoy it. So thank you and best of luck this weekend, my friend.
Thank you, man. Can't wait to do it again next week.
Guys, until next time, tomorrow afternoon, Vince Russo and myself. Until then, we are out.